"Bring me a new bowl," and he put salt in it, and so they brought it to him. Then he went out to the source of the water and cast in the salt there and said, "Thus saith the Lord, I have healed this water. From it there shall be no more death or barrenness." So the water remains healed to this day, according to the word which Elisha spoke. And we are in such an era right now. I believe that the church is in such an era right now, as far as the Holy Spirit's working in the course of the earth today, as far as the Holy Spirit's involvement right now, hand of involvement right now in the church today, of such a time of healings of the waters, of the supply source of the very church right now at this time, healings of the very waters of the supply source of God's bride, the body right now, globally, internationally. A very healing of the waters, very healing of the supply source, very reincorporation of the Oxbow Lake, or the cut off tributary of the church system back with society. Do you understand what I'm saying to you right now at this time? That God is wanting to heal the source of supply of the church right now. God is wanting to heal the source of supply of the church, of his bride right now at this time. A very disbursement of salt into the situation, very disbursement of the bowl of salt, as we saw with Elisha, into the waters. And Elisha said that the waters are now healed. According to the word of Elisha spoke, so the waters remained healed to this day. Symbolic of God's work of his Holy Spirit right now at this time, a very amalgamation of the church, a rejoining of the church system to society, the very rejoining of the cut-off or the tributary of the church, the Oxbow Lake of the church with society right now, a very reintroduction of his body and his church back into the Babylonish system, And you say, well, how can this be? How can this be? Very same thing happened in Jeremiah chapter 27. We read in the book of Jeremiah chapter 27, where the leaders of that time, the very leaders of that time, pushing against the will of the Holy Spirit, pushing against the will of God in the restraints of agreeing to staying underneath the Babylonish yoke of the time of the people of Judah, as they moved towards Babylon underneath the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar at this time. And the leaders of that day prophesying to the church, prophesying to the people. And God said, your leaders, they prophesy lies unto you, some of them. The leaders of your day, they prophesy, the prophets prophesy lies unto you, some of them. Very same thing today, the very restraint of God's people to want to have anything to do with the Babylonish yoke. Very fear of the church, very fear of the Christians. Do you hear what I'm saying to the church right now? Very fear of the Babylonians. Just like in the films, the movies of the very earlier days, the Cowboys and Indians movies of the very early settlers in the United States, very early settlers, pilgrims in the United States, very fear of the Indian tribes, very fear of the Indian man, scalping and killing the white pilgrims, the settlers from foreign lands, taking occupation of their land. Very fear of the Indian tribes, fear of their very invasion, the very same fear that we have today of the church, of the Babylonish system, gripped with fear and terror at the Babylonish system, the Babylonish yoke, the power of the Babylonians, the power of Hollywood, the power of California, the power of the New York Stock Exchange, the power of Europe, the power of France, or whatever your Babylon may be today, whatever your modern Babylon may be today, very fear of the Babylonian systems. very much the same fear that the early American pilgrims had of the tribes of Red Indians because of their horrific manner of dealing with the white man. Very symbolically used, just a very symbolic reflection on the situation. The very work of the Holy Spirit today within the life of the earth, within the life of the church right now, wanting to rejoin the state of the church, the very testament of believers, right now, to reintroduce them with the Babylonian system, reintroduce them with society, the very supply source, the very life source that God had planned for His church, had planned for His people. The only reason, I believe, the only reason why God has allowed the church to continue on in a state of separation, in a state of separatedness, and to continue on in prosperity, and to continue on in their abiding, is because of their dedication to Him, because of their dedication to serving Him, their dedication. Do you hear what I'm saying to the church right now? Do you hear me? The very reason for their dedication is allowed this to continue, but it was never God's plan. It was never God's plan for the church to go into a state of separation. It was never God's original intent for the church to go into a state of cut-offness, of separated states. It was never part of His plan, the original plan. But the testament of believers, the people of the day, modern day testament of believers, took something that Paul said and took it out of all context. They took it out of all context. They blew it out of all proportions. They inflated it way above its original meaning of intent. And it was not even the words of Christ. It was not even words spoken by Christ. Come out from among them and separate yourselves. Disperse. Separate yourselves unto the gospels. Disperse yourselves for the cause of the gospel, for the furtherance of the gospel. The manner in which it was spoken, the manner in which it was taught. It was never part of God's intent for the church to continue on in a separated state. The only reason why He's allowed it is because of their faithfulness and their commitment to the very Son of God, to the very Son of God. And we're seeing right now, at this very time, this very era right now in the church, a very leveling of the playing field, a very leveling, a very pushing out of our borders, the very pushing out of our territory, the very expansion of our stakes, of the region of the church. Do not call that which is unclean, clean, and do not call that which is clean, unclean. God will reinstate the borders of the church. He will reinstate the physical parameters, the physical boundaries of His people. I believe when Christ returns, in a regathering of His church, a regathering, a regrouping of His people. Do not call that which is clean, unclean. Do not call that which is clean, unclean, saith the Lord. The very reintroduction to the skills, the very introduction of new skills, the very reintroduction of fresh resource, the very introduction of new wealth into the church, the very reintroduction of assistance. I am able to legally assist you. I am able to financially assist. I am able to assist with skills and training. Very plugging in. A very plugging in to the supply which God had always intended for His people, but which the church had turned their back on. The very putting out of man out of the Garden of Eden, the very putting out of man out of the Garden of Eden because due to his disobedience, man has been retreating ever since from the situation, out of fear of disobedience to God. Fear of disobedience to His circumstance, fear of displeasing God. Very testament of believers. Separate yourselves unto the work of the gospel. Separate yourselves unto the work of the gospel. Do you understand what the Spirit of the Lord is saying to the church right now? He has healed the waters. Christ has healed the waters, just as Elisha poured the bowl of salt into the waters. So too Christ is healing the waters of the church right now. He's healing the waters of his church globally right now at this time. It's not about the yoke of Babylon. It's not about being equally yoked. It's not about compromising standards. It's not about compromising standards. It's not about accepting double standards. It's not about accepting a foreign yoke. It's about a reintroduction, a leveling of the playing fields, a pushing out of borders and a pushing out of territory. The very evangelists of this time, the very people of this time, the Billy Grahams and the Franklin Grahams and the Luis Palau and the Bonkers, Reinhardt and Greg Lowry's, some of the evangelists of this time may or may not be resisting the very move of God, resisting the very flow of the Holy Spirit at this time. They may not understand the hand of God right now in it, in the very leveling of the playing fields, in order that Christ may regather his bride, regather his body. And when Christ returns, he will reinstate the physical boundaries, the physical parameters of the church. Do you understand what the Spirit of the Lord is saying to the church right now at this time? We see in the very book of Jeremiah, chapter 27, in the book of Jeremiah, the very yoke of the Babylonian system, the very yoke of the Babylonians being placed upon the people of Judah. As the people of Judah came underneath the yoke of Babylon, under the yoke of King Nebuchadnezzar, we see Ananiah removing the yoke of wood from off the prophet Jeremiah, removing the yoke of wood. Your prophets prophesy lies, your leaders, some of them prophesy lies, they speak error. And Ananias says, I will remove this yoke of wood from off Jeremiah. And God says, in your disobedience to be obedient to the plan of God, to the move of God, I will replace the yokes of wood of the Babylonian system with yokes of iron.